Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, I invite you to step quietly into a world long forgotten. A world of moss and mist, where the air smells faintly of herbs and rain, and time itself seems to breathe a little slower. There once was a valley, hidden between the rolling hills of medieval England, a place locals called Hollow Vale. Few travellers ever passed that way, and those who did spoke of strange fragrances drifting from the forest, and a faint golden glow seen through the trees at dusk. In that quiet valley lived a woman known only as the Healer. Some said she could cure wounds that no physician could touch. Others whispered she was born under a wandering star, blessed or cursed with old knowledge. She lived alone, tending to the sick, gathering roots, drying leaves, and whispering prayers that came from a time before books remembered them. Tonight, we walk beside her, through seasons of light and shadow, through years of hope and heartbreak. We will listen to her thoughts, feel the rhythm of her hands at work, and glimpse the wisdom that once flowed through the heart of every forest. It is a story not of kings or wars, but of healing, of time, and of what it means to truly care for life itself. So, settle back, breathe deeply, and let the flicker of candlelight guide you into the Hollow Vale. And before we begin, if you enjoy these journeys through forgotten history, please remember to like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, dear listener, let the story begin. Morning in the Hollow Vale came softly, as if the sun itself feared to wake the valley too quickly. The mist lay heavy upon the fields, folding the world into layers of silver and silence. Birds called faintly from the hedgerows, their voices distant, like echoes from another time. The air smelled of wet moss, cold stone, and the faint sweetness of crushed time beneath the footstep of some unseen wanderer. The villagers used to say that no one truly entered Hollow Vale. The vale allowed you in only when it wished, as though it were alive, breathing gently beneath its own veil of fog. The valley was ringed by ancient woods, dark and still, where oaks leaned toward one another, like old monks whispering prayers to the wind. Those who dared to wander there at dawn often claimed they heard voices not quite human, the sound of leaves moving in words they could almost understand. At the far edge of the vale, beside a narrow brook, stood a small cottage with a thatched roof, the colour of old straw. Its chimney bent slightly from years of storms, and from it rose a thin, steady plume of smoke that mixed with the drifting fog. Inside that cottage lived the Healer of Hollow Vale. Her name was Alice to a few, though most simply called her the Woman in the Hollow. She had lived there longer than anyone could remember, and though her hair had turned white as frost, her hands were still steady as she crushed herbs each morning upon her worn wooden table. The cottage smelled always of life, of rosemary and sage, lavender and mint, smoke, and the faint salt of tears. She kept bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters, drying in the low golden light that filtered through the small window. She would wake before dawn, long before the village stirred, and step outside to gather dew from the leaves. It was said that the first light of morning gave her potions their strength. She would hum softly as she worked, an old tune no one else knew, a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself. Each day began with the same rhythm, the kettle warming on the hearth, the mortar and pestle grinding gently, the whisper of wind through the cracks in the door. On the table sat her book of cures, not a book of paper, but of memory, written upon her heart through years of watching, learning, healing. She knew which leaf cooled fever, which root drew out poison, which flower could ease the pain of childbirth or quiet a restless spirit. She had learned by listening, to the wind, to the river, to the quiet pulse that lived within every living thing. To those who came seeking her help, she was both mystery and comfort. They would climb the narrow path through the fog, clutching bundles of cloth-wrapped herbs or coins, and knock softly upon her door. Some came with wounds from the fields, others with grief they could not name. She welcomed all, asking for nothing but patience and sometimes silence. She believed that silence was often the first medicine. When she spoke, her voice was calm, low and certain, like the murmur of the brook outside. She never hurried, never raised her tone. Her eyes, pale green and soft, seemed to see beyond the skin into the place where sorrow lived. She would touch a wrist, listen to the breath, and nod as though the body had whispered its secrets directly into her ear. Then she would brew a potion or tie a charm from thread and leaf and send the visitor home with gentle words that lingered like warmth long after they left. Children in the village feared her at first. They whispered that she spoke with spirits, that her shadow moved even when she stood still. But when sickness came and her hands eased their fever, their fear melted into awe. Even the elders, who muttered prayers when they passed her gate, came quietly in the night when pain grew too great to bear. She never turned them away. The healer belonged to no church, no lord, no master. Her faith was older, a faith in the balance of things, in water and fire, in earth that gives and takes in equal measure. On some mornings, she would sit outside her cottage as the sun broke through the fog and warmed the stones. She watched the mist lift from the meadows and the sheep move slowly through the grass. She thought of how each breath of wind carried the scent of things long dead and newly born, of how nothing ever truly vanished, only changed. She had seen children she once nursed grow into parents, and parents fade into the soil that fed her herbs. Time to her was not a line, but a circle, forever turning. One autumn, when the leaves burned red and gold on the hillsides, a traveller came through the valley. He was young, with a scholar's satchel and boots stained by long roads. He asked for directions to the next town, but his voice was hoarse, and his eyes carried a fever's shine. Alice invited him in, offered him water, and without asking more, began to mix something from her shelves. She crushed dried yarrow and willow bark, murmuring softly as she worked. The traveller watched her, half delirious, as she stirred the mixture into a steaming cup. The smell was bitter, but he drank it all the same. Within an hour, his shaking eased, his colour returned, and his breathing steadied. He tried to thank her, but she only smiled and said, "The earth thanks you back." He slept that night by her hearth, listening to the soft crackle of wood and the faint hum of her voice as she spoke to the flames. The next morning, when the traveller awoke, she was already gone into the woods, her basket over one arm. He stepped outside and saw the valley bathed in golden light. The mist had burned away, revealing a place so still and perfect that it seemed outside of time. He felt a strange calm settle over him, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. He stayed another day, helping her gather herbs, learning their names: comfrey, valerian, mugwort, elderflower. She told him stories of each, not as ingredients, but as old friends with their own tempers and gifts. Before he left, he asked her how she had come to live alone in such a forgotten place. She looked toward the hills and said quietly, "Because the world grows loud, and healing needs silence." Then she turned back to her garden, her fingers brushing over the leaves as though reading the words written in green. As he walked away from Hollow Vale, the traveller felt as though he were leaving a dream. He looked back once, and the mist had already begun to gather again, hiding the cottage from view. Some say that years later, he wrote of a valley that never appeared on any map, where a woman tended the wounds of time itself. But those who searched for it never found it again. Only the wind carried her name, a whisper through the heather, soft and eternal. And so the healer's days went on, season after season, beneath the patient gaze of the hills. Her story was not one of miracles, but of moments. The steady rhythm of hands that healed, of candles that burned low into night, of a soul that lived quietly and left the world gentler than she found it. Morning came softly to Hollow Vale, as if the light itself were cautious not to disturb the hush that lingered from the night before. Mist clung to the valley, curling around the roots of the old trees like pale silk. The healer awoke before dawn, as he always did. His small window let in a slice of amber light, and the air smelled faintly of damp moss and crushed sage. He rose quietly, stretching his arms toward the beams of sunlight that slipped between the shutters. The day ahead would be long, but his spirit was calm, steady, and anchored in routine. He believed that healing was not merely the art of herbs and salves, but a rhythm of life itself, a conversation between human breath and the pulse of the earth. He tied the worn leather straps of his satchel and stepped outside, feeling the dew-soaked grass cool against his bare feet. Beyond the cottage, the woods murmured softly. The villagers called it the Whispering Woods, for when the wind brushed through the pines, it sounded as though countless voices were speaking all at once, some in joy, others in sorrow. They said that the forest remembered everything that had ever happened there, that every tree bore witness to the laughter and the grief of generations. Some avoided the woods for that reason, whispering that spirits still wandered its depths. But for the healer, it was a place of peace. It was where he gathered the plants that could soothe fever, still pain, and coax the dying back toward life. He followed the narrow path that wound between the birches, the soft earth giving way beneath each step. In his mind, he recited the names of herbs as if they were prayers: yarrow for the blood, comfrey for the bones, angelica for strength. The forest opened like a cathedral, sunlight spilling through its canopy in shafts of gold. A woodpecker's tapping echoed like a slow heartbeat. He crouched to collect foxglove leaves, their green flecked with silver dew. He plucked gently, speaking softly as he worked, thanking the earth for its gifts. Each leaf went into his satchel as though it were something sacred. A rustle caught his ear, light, quick, and uncertain. He turned and saw a young boy standing a few paces away, his clothes ragged, his eyes wide with the mix of curiosity and fear. "You're the healer," the boy said, voice trembling slightly. The healer nodded, setting aside his bundle of herbs. "My mother said you can help people," the boy went on, twisting his hands together. "She says you can make pain go away." The healer smiled faintly, a warmth touching his otherwise solemn face. "Sometimes," he said, "if the forest allows it." The boy frowned, confused by the answer, but there was trust in his eyes. "Then come," the boy whispered. "My sister is sick." Together they walked deeper into the woods. The path narrowed, roots curling across it like veins beneath the skin of the earth. The healer's robes brushed against the ferns, scattering drops of water. He asked nothing more of the boy. His silence was kind, patient. He had learned long ago that fear and grief needed space to breathe before they could be spoken. When they reached a clearing, the healer paused, inhaling the scent of wild thyme. "This way," the boy said, pointing toward a crumbling cottage hidden beneath ivy and thyme. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and damp straw. A young girl lay on a bed of blankets near the hearth, her face pale, her breath shallow. The healer knelt beside her, feeling the faint rhythm of her pulse beneath his fingers. Her skin was cool, but there was heat beneath it, a fever waiting to rise. He reached into his satchel and began to mix his remedies with quiet precision. A few drops of willow bark for the pain, elderflower for the fever, and a pinch of ground sage to clear the lungs. He stirred the herbs into a small cup of warm water, the scent filling the air like rain. As the girl drank, her breathing steadied slightly. The healer placed a damp cloth on her forehead, murmuring words not of magic, but of comfort. "Rest now," he said softly. "The forest watches over you." The boy's mother stood nearby, tears brimming in her eyes. She whispered her thanks, but the healer only nodded. He never accepted praise. Healing, to him, was not an act of power. It was an act of listening, of balance, of remembering the ancient harmony between humankind and the living earth. When the girl fell asleep, the healer stepped outside. The mist had lifted, revealing the green sweep of the valley below. The boy followed, holding a small wooden carving in his hands. "She carved this," he said quietly, showing the healer the figure of a bird with wings spread wide. "She said it was a spirit that protects us." The healer took the carving gently, studying the worn grooves of the wood. "Then she is not alone," he said, handing it back. The boy smiled for the first time that morning. On the way home, The healer's thoughts wandered to the old legends of the forest. The elders had once spoken of a time when these woods were tended by guardians, keepers of knowledge who could hear the songs of plants and rivers. Some said their wisdom lived on in those who still walked the forest paths with reverence. The healer did not claim such lineage, yet at times, when the wind moved through the branches, he felt something ancient stir within him, an echo of a voice older than memory. He returned to his cottage as the sun reached its zenith. The light fell through the window, scattering patterns across his table. He set down his satchel, washed his hands in a basin of cool water, and prepared a new tincture for the coming days. As he worked, he thought of the girl, her pale face softening into rest, her spirit tethered delicately to life. He hoped that the woods would lend her strength, as they always did to those who listened. By evening, Hollow Vale had returned to its quiet rhythm. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the sound of distant laughter drifted across the fields. The healer sat outside his door, cup of herbal tea warming his hands, watching the twilight settle over the valley. In the distance, the whispering woods shimmered under the first touch of moonlight. The trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets only the night could hear. The healer listened, eyes half closed, until the voices of the forest became indistinguishable from the sound of his own heartbeat. And in that moment, as the stars began to appear one by one over the ridge, he felt a quiet certainty that every life he touched, every herb he gathered, every word he spoke in kindness was part of something vast and ancient, a living memory, stretching beyond the reach of time. The healer smiled faintly, letting the calm of the night wrap around him like a familiar cloak. Tomorrow, he would rise again before the sun, and the rhythm of Hollow Vale would begin anew. The dawn came with a hush that felt different that morning, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. The healer woke before the sun had fully risen, stirred not by habit, but by a quiet pull he could not explain. The air was unusually still, the mists thicker than before, winding around the cottage like pale ghosts. He sat at the edge of his bed for a long while, listening to the sound of his own breathing mingling with the faint drip of dew outside. Something deep within him whispered that the day would not be like the others. He stepped out into the soft light, his cloak drawn close against the morning chill. The woods beyond seemed darker today, shadows pooling beneath the trees as though the forest were gathering its secrets. Birds sang, but their songs were distant, restrained. He felt the weight of the silence between the sounds, the spaces where the forest seemed to be thinking. As he made his way along the narrow path, the ground felt softer, yielding more easily beneath his feet, and the scent of the earth was heavy, rich, almost sweet, like something newly unearthed. When he reached the glade where he often gathered herbs, he stopped. The dew-laced grass was disturbed, pressed down in uneven patches. At first, he thought perhaps a deer had passed through during the night, but then he saw something else. The faint outline of stones, arranged in a half circle, barely visible beneath the moss. He knelt and brushed the green away with his fingertips. The stones were old, so old that even the lichen growing upon them seemed ancient. Strange markings covered their surfaces, symbols carved in spirals and lines, so worn by time that they seemed more felt than seen. He traced one of the carvings with his thumb, a shiver crawling up his arm. The shape was unfamiliar, yet somehow known, like a half-remembered dream. As he leaned closer, a low hum reached his ears, a vibration deep within the ground, too faint to be sound, more like a heartbeat echoing through the soil. The healer froze. The sensation passed as quickly as it came, leaving only the whisper of wind through leaves. He stood slowly, eyes sweeping the clearing, and for a moment he thought he saw movement at the edge of his vision, a flicker of light among the roots of a great oak. Drawn by curiosity, he approached the oak. Its trunk was massive, its bark gnarled with age. At its base, half hidden beneath tangled roots, was a hollow. He crouched and peered inside, his breath misting in the cold air. The hollow descended deeper than it appeared, a tunnel of earth leading into darkness. Something gleamed faintly within, metal or perhaps stone, reflecting the dim morning light. Without hesitation, he reached in and pulled it free. It was a small pendant, its chain broken and tarnished, its center set with a smooth stone, the color of river water. The design was simple but deliberate, the kind of craftsmanship rarely seen anymore. The healer turned the pendant over in his hands, feeling its cool weight. Symbols like those on the stones were etched around its edge. He could not read them, but a strange warmth spread through his palm as he held it, pulsing softly in rhythm with his heart. He slipped it into his satchel and rose, glancing once more at the hollow. The hum beneath the ground had faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves. Still, he knew the forest had shown him something for a reason. Later that morning, he visited the village. The market square was alive with quiet chatter, the clatter of carts, the smell of fresh bread, and the sound of the blacksmith's hammer echoing through the still air. Yet even amid the life of the village, he felt that faint hum beneath his feet, a reminder of the hidden pulse of the valley. He stopped at the baker's stall, trading herbs for a loaf, and the old woman behind the counter gave him a knowing smile. "The woods have been restless," she said. "Animals moving strangely, the birds flying low. You've felt it too, haven't you?" The healer nodded but said nothing. He made his way to the edge of the village where an ancient well stood. Its stones were dark with age, and a carving on its rim caught his eye, a spiral like the ones he'd seen that morning. He ran his fingers over it, tracing its curve. The same hum stirred faintly again, rising through the soles of his boots. He looked around. No one else seemed to notice. The villagers drew water here every day, yet none of them sensed the quiet rhythm beneath their feet. The healer's heart beat faster. Something old, perhaps forgotten by all but the forest, was stirring once more. That evening, he sat by the fire in his cottage, the pendant resting on the table before him. The flames cast shifting light across its surface, making the symbols seem alive. He took out one of his old books, a collection of herbal wisdom and folklore passed down through generations. Near the back, in faded ink, he found mention of an ancient circle deep in the woods. It spoke of roots that remember, of a sleeping heart beneath the veil. The words were vague, poetic, but they carried the same rhythm as the carvings he had seen. As he read, a memory rose from the depths of his mind, his grandmother's voice, telling him stories by the hearth when he was a child. She had spoken of the first healer, a figure said to have walked the valley long before the village was built, who learned the language of the earth and healed not just the body, but the land itself. When his time ended, she said, the earth took him back, his spirit sinking into the roots of the forest to watch over those who came after. Every healer, she had whispered, is but an echo of the first. He closed the book, his gaze lingering on the pendant. Could it be that this relic was connected to that legend? He had never put much faith in myths, yet the pulse he had felt beneath the ground was no trick of the imagination. There was something alive within the veil, something ancient and waiting. Night deepened outside. The moon climbed above the treetops, casting silver light across the glade. He stepped outside, the pendant in his hand, and walked toward the woods. The air was colder now, filled with the faint scent of pine and rain. As he reached the clearing once more, the hum returned, stronger this time, rising like a low song from the earth. The stones glimmered faintly under the moonlight, their carvings illuminated as if by breath. He stood in the center of the circle, holding the pendant out before him. The hum deepened, resonating with the stone's faint glow. The air seemed to thicken, the night folding in around him. For a moment, he felt weightless, caught between the seen and unseen. Then, as quickly as it began, the sound faded, leaving only silence. The glow in the pendant dimmed. The healer lowered it slowly, his heart steady but filled with awe. He knew then that the forest was not merely alive, it was remembering, and whatever it remembered, whatever it waited for, was somehow tied to him. The pendant had chosen him, or perhaps the forest had. Either way, his life had quietly changed beneath the stillness of that moonlit night. When he returned home, he placed the pendant beside his bed and lay awake for a long while, listening to the soft murmurs of the woods through the open window. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and something older, something that felt like memory itself. Before sleep finally took him, he thought he heard a voice, soft as a sigh, drifting through the trees. It spoke no words he knew, yet its meaning was clear as dawn. Remember what was forgotten. And so beneath the quiet stars of Hollow Vale, the healer dreamed, not of herbs or illness, but of roots stretching deep beneath the valley of light, flowing through soil and stone, and of the first heartbeat that ever echoed there. The forest, in its own way, had begun to awaken. The morning arrived in Hollow Vale, wrapped in silver mist, the kind that softened the edges of the world and made every tree, stone and blade of grass seem as though it had been placed by careful, unseen hands. The healer awoke with the pendant resting on his chest, its cool weight grounding him, its faint glow pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Outside, the woods breathed slowly, their branches stretching toward the sky as if greeting the sun with deliberate reverence. A bird's call echoed softly through the mist, a single note that seemed to linger longer than it should, hanging in the quiet air like a secret waiting to be told. He rose from his bed, wrapping his cloak around him, and stepped into the morning chill. The dew soaked his sandals, cold and invigorating. He walked to the clearing where the stones rested, the ones he had discovered the day before. The pendant in his hand caught the first rays of sunlight, and for a moment he swore it shimmered with its own inner light. He knelt beside the stones, brushing away the moss once more. The carvings, intricate spirals and flowing lines, seemed to shift subtly under his gaze, as though the memory of their creation still lingered beneath the surface. He remembered the old tales told by his grandmother, whispered by firelight. She had spoken of the first healer, a figure whose knowledge had been so deep that the forest itself had taken notice. It was said that every herb, every root, every breath of wind through the trees had spoken to this healer, sharing wisdom in a language older than words. He had dismissed the stories as the fanciful musings of an old woman, yet now, standing in the mist among the stones, he could feel something ancient stirring beneath the soil, something alive, something patient, and yet expectant. Drawing a deep breath, he touched the pendant once more. The metal was cool, but it vibrated faintly, as if it contained a heartbeat of its own. The hum he had felt the night before returned, subtle at first, then growing in resonance until it seemed to echo through every fiber of his being. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the veil flow through him. He imagined the first healer walking these very paths, hands brushing over leaves and roots, listening to the earth, speaking softly to the winds. A memory that was not entirely his own unfolded behind his eyelids, a vision of a figure moving gracefully among the ancient oaks, gathering herbs and whispering to the forest as though it were an old friend. The forest seemed to respond. A breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the faint scent of wild thyme and sage. Somewhere, a stream gurgled, its voice rising and falling like quiet laughter. The healer opened his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a shadow among the trees, a figure indistinct, yet undeniably present. It moved with ease, almost floating, as though weightless. He blinked, and it was gone. Only the hum remained, echoing in the ground beneath him, and the pendant in his hand, glowing faintly as if acknowledging recognition. He stood slowly and began to walk along the forest path, the pendant swinging gently against his chest. He noticed small details he had overlooked before. The way the roots curled around stones, forming natural patterns that resembled the carvings on the circle. The way the sunlight broke through the canopy in a lattice of golden threads. The subtle scent of herbs that seemed to grow not in clusters, but in intentional arrangements, as though the forest itself had planted them with care. He felt the first stirrings of understanding. The first healer had not merely walked the forest, but had shaped it, taught it, and in some way, bound it to a memory that survived beyond a single lifetime. As the morning advanced, he returned to his cottage. The pendant lay on the table, and he began to examine it more closely. Its surface was etched with symbols that he could not read, yet each line seemed to pulse with meaning. He consulted his books, ancient texts passed down through generations, fragile and yellowed with age, but found nothing that matched the carvings exactly. Still, he sensed that the knowledge was there, embedded not in words, but in feeling. He closed his eyes, letting his mind wander, allowing the pendant's pulse to guide him. He pictured the first healer gathering herbs for a feverish child, whispering chants to calm spirits, tending both the body and the land. The rhythm of that work seeped into his own movements, shaping the morning as he prepared teas, poultices, and balms. The villagers came as usual, seeking remedies for ailments small and great. He treated them with the same careful attention, yet each touch, each word, now carried the weight of something older. He felt the pulse beneath the soil as he worked, guiding his hands to the right leaves, the right stems, the right flowers. Even the animals seemed to sense it. A stray dog lingered near the door, watching quietly, and a cat curled against the hearth, purring in gentle resonance. Life moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm, a dance in which every creature, every plant, every breath was attuned to a pattern older than memory. By mid-afternoon, the healer felt compelled to return to the circle of stones. The sun was high, and the forest floor was speckled with shifting light. He knelt once more, placing the pendant carefully among the stones. As he did, the hum returned, vibrating through the soles of his feet, threading through his spine, resonating in his chest. It was as if the stones themselves were speaking. A silent language carried through vibration, an echo of the first healer's presence. He leaned closer, touching the carvings, and for a fleeting moment, the forest seemed to inhale around him, the air dense with unspoken words and memories that predated human knowledge. The day faded into evening, and a golden glow settled over the vale. He returned to his cottage, the pendant clasped in his hands. He placed it near the hearth, letting the fading light illuminate its intricate design. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and crushed herbs. He felt a quiet certainty, a connection that extended beyond time, linking him not only to the first healer, but to every breath, every step, every whisper of the forest that had survived centuries. Night deepened. He sat by the window, watching the silver mist roll over the hills. Stars began to appear, scattered across the sky like fragments of light pressed into velvet. The hum beneath the soil was softer now, a gentle reminder of the day's revelations. He thought of the lessons hidden in the forest, the patience of roots, the resilience of herbs, the wisdom of listening. He understood that healing was never just about curing a body. It was about tending to memory, to connection, to the quiet heartbeat that threaded life together. Before sleep claimed him, he took one last look at the pendant, its glow faint against the night. The vision of the first healer lingered in his mind, hands moving with care, eyes attuned to life in every form, a presence that shaped both forest and heart. Tomorrow, he would follow these whispers further, seeking the origins of the circle, the roots beneath the veil, and the knowledge that had slept for centuries. And perhaps, in listening, in walking the same paths, in tending the same plants, he would discover the truth of what it meant to be part of a lineage older than the stones themselves. And so, the hollow veil settled under the night sky, breathing gently, its secrets wrapped in mist and memory, awaiting the healer's next steps. The dawn was pale and hesitant that morning. The sun, a thin sliver of light, just brushing the hills surrounding Hollow Vale. The valley lay quiet beneath its misty blanket, and even the birds sang in low, measured tones. The healer awoke slowly, sensing the weight of the day before lingered in his chest, like the faint hum of roots beneath the soil. The pendant rested near his pillow, cool and silent, yet pulsing faintly with an energy he could feel beneath his fingertips. Today, he felt, would bring knowledge, something buried, something waiting for patient hands to uncover it. He moved through his cottage with his usual rhythm, tending the herbs that hung in bundles from the rafters. The air smelled of lavender, sage, and the faint smoke from last night's fire. Each step, each breath, each motion was deliberate, a quiet meditation that prepared him for what the day might reveal. He carried the pendant in his palm, feeling the subtle vibration that seemed to align with the heartbeat of the veil itself. Even the cat perched on the windowsill seemed to sense the anticipation, its green eyes following him as he moved. He had long suspected there was more to the forest, to the valley, than could be seen with the eyes alone. The carvings on the stones, the hum beneath the earth, and the visions of the first healer pressed upon him a sense of duty, a calling to uncover what had been forgotten. For years, he had relied on memory, on whispered stories, on herbs and intuition. But now, he felt the need for a record, something tangible that might reveal the depth of the knowledge carried by the first healer. The attic of his cottage had long been neglected, a dusty space filled with the smell of old wood, dried flowers, and time itself. He climbed the narrow stairs, brushing cobwebs aside, the floor creaking beneath his weight. The morning light filtered through a small window, illuminating a collection of old boxes, chests, and jars, each filled with fragments of the past. Dried roots, pressed leaves, bottles of tinctures long forgotten, and faded scrolls tied with silk ribbons. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the weight of history pressing gently against his shoulders. Then his hands moved with certainty, opening a small chest that had been tucked in the farthest corner. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had yellowed with age, lay a manuscript. Its cover was leather, cracked and worn, embossed with symbols that mirrored those on the stones in the clearing and the pendant. He held it carefully, reverently, and brushed the dust from its surface. Opening it, he found pages filled with delicate, looping script, faded but legible, accompanied by diagrams of herbs, roots, and the shapes of plants that he recognized from his own work. The handwriting was precise, flowing with a quiet confidence, each line carrying a rhythm that seemed almost musical. He began to read, the words unfolding like a slow river. The manuscript spoke of balance, between body and earth, between spirit and flesh, between human needs and the cycles of the forest. It described techniques for drawing strength from plants, ways of listening to the wind, methods of observing the rhythms of life without disturbing them. Notes in the margins spoke of the first healer's personal reflections, the doubts, fears, and joys that accompanied each lesson learned. Some pages detailed remedies for common illnesses. Others offered meditations meant to align the practitioner with the pulse of the land. As he read, the valley outside seemed to respond. The mist lifted in thin ribbons, sunlight spilling through the canopy of the woods, casting dappled patterns across the cottage floor. The air carried the faint scent of wet moss and lavender, blending with the smoke from the fire. He felt a quiet exhilaration, the thrill of discovery mingled with a profound sense of peace. Here, in his hands, was a bridge across centuries, a direct connection to a life that had walked the same forest, breathed the same air, and listened to the same whispers beneath the trees. Hours passed unnoticed. He traced diagrams of roots and herbs with his fingers, cross-referencing them with the plants he tended daily. He copied passages into his own book, careful to preserve the delicate balance of knowledge and observation. The manuscript revealed insights he had never considered, the timing of planting and gathering, the influence of moonlight on the potency of herbs, the subtle interplay of scent and taste in remedies, and the importance of silence as a medicine in itself. Every word seemed to echo the pulse beneath his feet, the heartbeat of Hollow Vale, the living memory of the first healer. As the afternoon sun reached its zenith, a gentle knock came at the door. A villager stood there, carrying a basket of apples and a wounded bird. The healer rose, placing a bookmark in the manuscript, and greeted the visitor with calm eyes. He treated the bird, mending its wing with careful hands, and offered the villager words of guidance and reassurance. Yet even in this simple act, he felt the teachings of the manuscript guiding him: patience, observation, attentiveness, and respect for the fragile balance of life. When the villager departed, the healer returned to the attic. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, the manuscript open before him. He felt the pulse again, the faint vibration through the floorboards, aligning with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Each page seemed to hum softly, as though the words themselves were alive, carrying the memory of the first healer into the present. He could feel a connection forming, a lineage stretching across time, binding his hands, his mind, and his spirit to those who had walked the Vale centuries before. Night fell, wrapping Hollow Vale in its gentle cloak of stars. The hearth burned low, casting a soft golden glow across the room. The manuscript lay open on his lap, pages turning slowly in the quiet evening air. He studied a passage describing a ritual for gathering night-blooming herbs, meant to capture the moon's energy and infuse the remedy with subtle, hidden strength. He realized that the first healer had not only tended the body and the land, but had also honored the unseen forces that shaped life, the cycles of sun and moon, the subtle energies of water and soil, the whispers of wind and leaf. Sleep approached, but he could not close the manuscript. Instead, he sat in the dim light, reading, absorbing, listening. The hum beneath the floor softened, fading into the quiet rhythm of the valley at night. And as he finally leaned back against the wooden beams of the attic, eyes closing, he felt the presence of the first healer near him. Not as a ghost, but as a memory alive in the rhythm of the Vale, in the pulse of every root, every leaf, and every breath he took. In that stillness, he understood something profound. That knowledge, when nurtured patiently, does not die. It waits, sometimes for centuries, for hands ready to receive it, for hearts willing to listen. And in Hollow Vale, the legacy of the first healer had found its next keeper. The night deepened, and the pendant on the table glowed faintly, a soft beacon in the shadows. The healer drifted into sleep with the manuscript open beside him, dreams filled with roots that reached into the earth like veins, with herbs glowing faintly under moonlight, and with the steady, timeless heartbeat of a forest that had waited patiently to be remembered. The morning light arrived over Hollow Vale like a soft sigh, gilding the mist that lingered between the hills and curling along the forest floor. The healer awoke slowly, the manuscript still open beside him, and the pendant resting against his chest. Outside, the valley was quiet, yet the air carried a subtle tension, a hint of unease that made the hairs on his arms prickle. Something had shifted. The gentle rhythm of the Vale was no longer so steady. The pulse beneath the soil throbbed faintly, uneven, as if in warning. He rose and dressed carefully, drawing his cloak around him, and stepped into the early morning chill. The village was already stirring when he arrived at the square. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the scent of fresh bread mingled with the damp earth, but whispers followed him like shadows. Villagers spoke in hushed tones, their faces drawn with concern. Children clutched the hands of their parents, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. The healer paused near the well, listening. It was a subtle change at first, a fever spreading among a few, a cough here, a weakness there. Yet as he moved among them, the pattern became clearer, and a knot of worry tightened in his chest. This was no ordinary sickness. The forest, the very soil of the Vale, seemed to pulse with it, carrying it from house to house, whisper to whisper. He returned home to prepare remedies, consulting the manuscript for guidance. The first healer's words were precise, yet layered with subtle insight. It spoke of diseases that arose not solely from imbalance in the body, but from disruption in the harmony between humans and the land. The valley remembers, one passage read, and the body is never separate from the pulse of soil, water, and root. He traced the words with his finger, feeling the pendant vibrate faintly against his palm. This sickness, he realized, was connected to the forest itself, or to some disturbance in the rhythm that had long been maintained. He packed his satchel with herbs, tinctures, and poultices, selecting each plant with care. Yarrow and willow bark for fever and inflammation, elderflower to soothe the lungs, and a tincture made from night-blooming herbs that the manuscript described as able to draw out shadows from the body. He moved quickly but deliberately, knowing that panic would not aid anyone. His calmness would carry strength as surely as any remedy. At the first house, a young woman lay on a narrow bed, her skin pale, her pulse faint and uneven. Her mother hovered near the doorway, worry etched into her face. The healer knelt, placing a hand gently on the girl's forehead, feeling the subtle vibration of the sickness through the soles of his boots. He mixed herbs into warm water, murmuring the quiet incantations noted in the manuscript, words that were less spoken spells than careful observations of life's hidden currents. The girl drank, and he placed a cool compress on her brow, listening as the hum beneath the earth pulsed faintly, responding. As the morning wore on, more villagers arrived, each presenting signs of the same mysterious illness: weakness, fever, pale skin, and restless nights. The healer moved among them methodically, attending to each with precision and care. Yet in the back of his mind, he felt the forest calling, urging him toward a deeper understanding, toward the source of this sickness that no ordinary remedy could fully cure. Each step through the village seemed guided, drawn by an invisible line connecting the pulse of life, the manuscript's teachings, and the wisdom of the first healer. By mid-afternoon, the healer paused to rest briefly, leaning against the trunk of a great oak at the edge of the whispering woods. The air was dense with the scent of damp leaves and herbs, mingling with the faint, acrid tang of fever. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the rhythm beneath the soil, the subtle beat that connected him to the valley, to the forest, to the life he had sworn to protect. And there, in that quiet moment, a vision came, faint at first, then clearer. A dark root beneath the veil, knotted and twisted, pulsing with the sickness that had spread to the villagers. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, something had disturbed the rhythm, something that the first healer would have noticed long ago. The insight came with a weighty clarity. The illness was not random. It was connected to imbalance, to forgotten rituals, to energies in the valley that had gone unattended. The healer realized that he would have to walk deeper into the forest than ever before, to seek not just herbs, but understanding, to confront the hidden source of the sickness that had begun to ripple through Hollow Vale. The forest seemed to lean closer, its branches arching, leaves brushing against each other as though whispering guidance. Evening approached as he returned to his cottage to gather more preparations. He selected additional plants from the manuscript, roots that strengthened the blood, flowers that soothed the spirit, leaves that quieted the mind. He boiled water, preparing infusions and poultices with care, all the while listening to the subtle rhythm beneath the floorboards, the hum that connected the life of the village, the forest, and his own pulse. Night fell, and the healer set out with a lantern in hand, moving carefully along the forest path. The mists swirled around him, hiding the familiar trail, yet he felt the pendant pull him forward, its faint glow illuminating the carvings of roots and spirals etched into the stones at the clearing. There, in the center of the circle, he knelt and placed the remedies in a careful pattern. Following instructions remembered from the manuscript, he whispered words of balance and harmony, quiet acknowledgements of the valley's memory, letting the energy flow through him, through the herbs, through the stones, into the forest. Hours passed, and slowly, the pulse beneath the ground steadied. The hum softened, the forest exhaled, and a quiet calm settled over Hollow Vale. The healer returned to the village at dawn, his body weary, but his mind clear. One by one, the sick showed signs of recovery, their breathing steadier, their color returning, their eyes brighter. Yet he knew the true challenge had only begun. The sickness had revealed a deeper truth. Hollow Vale held hidden energies, ancient and alive, that required not only remedies, but understanding, reverence, and a continual balance between humans and the forest. The healer spent the rest of that day tending to the recovering villagers, all the while thinking of the roots beneath the veil, the first healer's teachings, and the mysterious hum that connected everything. He felt a quiet determination settle over him. He would uncover the source of the imbalance, understand its cause, and ensure that the harmony of the valley was restored for generations to come. When night fell, he returned to the clearing, the pendant glowing softly in the lantern light. He knelt in the circle once more, whispering thanks to the forest, to the roots, and to the memory of the first healer. The valley was still, the mist curling like smoke around the stones, and the stars overhead seemed to wink in quiet approval. The healer felt the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on his shoulders, and for the first time, he understood that his journey was not only about healing bodies, but about tending to memory itself, the heartbeat of Hollow Vale, ancient, persistent, and patient. The morning in Hollow Vale was quiet, almost reverent, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. Mist rolled lazily along the hills, weaving between the trees like a gentle sigh, and the first light of the sun struck the tips of the leaves with a delicate shimmer. The healer awoke slowly, the pendant resting against his chest, its pulse faint yet insistent, calling him toward the forest. The events of the past days lingered in his mind. The sickness, the manuscript, the hum beneath the soil. And he knew that the next step would require courage, patience, and a deep listening to the pulse that had guided him thus far. He dressed quietly, drawing his cloak tight against the morning chill, and made his way toward the whispering woods. The forest welcomed him in its usual hush, sunlight spilling in latticed patterns across the moss-covered ground. Birds flitted silently through the branches, their songs muted, as though acknowledging the importance of the moment. The pendant throbbed faintly with each step, aligning with the rhythm of the earth, the valley, and the healer's own heartbeat. As he approached the clearing where the ancient stone stood, the hum beneath the ground grew stronger, resonating through his feet, his legs, and into his chest. The stones, worn and moss-covered, seemed to radiate a gentle warmth under his touch. He knelt among them, letting the pendant rest lightly in his palm. Closing his eyes, he listened, not to the sounds of the forest, but to the quiet vibration that threaded through soil, root, and stone. The pulse guided him forward, deeper into the woods, to a place that felt older than memory itself. The path led him to the great oak he had seen before, its trunk massive and gnarled, roots curling around stones and earth like the veins of the valley. A hollow at its base beckoned him, and he approached with reverence, recognizing the threshold of something sacred. The air was cooler here, thick with the scent of moss, damp wood, and faint traces of herbs long since forgotten. The pendant's glow intensified slightly, casting a pale light that revealed carvings hidden beneath the roots, spirals, lines, and symbols like those in the manuscript, etched centuries ago by hands that had understood the pulse of life itself. He crouched and reached into the hollow, fingers brushing the smooth inner surface. The tunnel descended farther than it appeared, earth and root entwined, forming a natural staircase leading downward. A low hum resonated from within, vibrating gently through his bones. He took a deep breath, lantern in hand, and began his slow descent, each step measured, deliberate. The forest above seemed to lean in, listening as he moved closer to the source of its secrets. The tunnel opened into a chamber beneath the oak, a hollow vast and circular, its walls lined with roots that glimmered faintly in the lantern light. Here, the earth seemed alive, breathing in subtle rhythms, whispering quiet knowledge. At the center lay a stone pedestal, carved with symbols he had seen in the manuscript and on the pendant. Resting atop it was a collection of objects: a wooden staff worn smooth by centuries of use, bundles of dried herbs tied with faded ribbons, and a small leather-bound book, its cover etched with spirals and flowing lines that pulsed softly under the lantern's glow. The healer approached slowly, reverence guiding his hands. He picked up the book and opened it, pages yellowed and delicate, filled with the first healer's precise yet flowing script. The words spoke of balance, patience, and the deep connection between body, mind, and earth. They described methods of listening to the pulse of the valley, understanding the hidden currents of energy, and using herbs not merely as medicine, but as instruments to harmonize life itself. Notes in the margins contained personal reflections, observations on human nature, on the rhythms of the forest, on the silent language of roots and water. He sat cross-legged on the earth floor, lantern at his side, absorbing each line. The chamber seemed to hum in response, the roots vibrating gently, the air carrying the faint scent of herbs and soil. He traced diagrams of plants and roots with his fingertips, recognizing techniques that aligned with what he had seen and learned in the manuscript above. The first healer's wisdom was both practical and spiritual, blending knowledge of the body with reverence for the unseen forces that governed life in the veil. Hours passed like minutes. The healer experimented carefully, arranging herbs in the patterns described, whispering the quiet meditations noted in the book. He felt the pulse of the valley strengthen, the vibration beneath his feet settling into a calm, steady rhythm. The chamber itself seemed to breathe, responding to his intent, to his presence, to his willingness to listen. Each breath, each careful movement, felt like a dialogue with the first healer, a continuation of practices begun centuries ago. As evening approached, the healer rose, taking the pendant from around his neck and placing it gently on the pedestal. The symbols etched into both stone and metal glimmered faintly, a soft acknowledgement of his discovery. He ran his fingers along the carvings, feeling the continuity between the chamber, the forest above, and the valley beyond. The first healer's teachings were not simply instructions, they were a way of being, a philosophy woven into the very fabric of Hollow Vale. He left the chamber with care, retracing his steps up the root-lined tunnel. The forest greeted him quietly, leaves brushing together in soft acknowledgement. The stars began to appear as the mist of night rolled in, and he walked back to his cottage with a deep sense of clarity. The manuscript, the pendant, and now the chamber beneath the ancient oak had revealed not only knowledge, but a responsibility to maintain the balance, to listen to the pulse of the land, and to act with patience and care. That night, the valley was calm. The hum beneath the soil was steady. The wind whispered gently through the trees, and the healer placed the first healer's book beside his own manuscripts, feeling a continuity that stretched across centuries. He sat by the hearth, lantern casting a soft glow across the room, reflecting on the chamber, the roots, and the hidden heart of the valley. It was a place of memory, of life, and of patience, a secret preserved in the pulse of the forest, waiting for one willing to listen. Sleep came slowly, filled with visions of roots stretching deep into the earth, streams of moonlight illuminating herbs in quiet glades, and the heartbeat of Hollow Vale resonating through stone and soil. The healer dreamed not only of remedies and rituals, but of understanding, a comprehension of life, as subtle currents of balance preserved and restored, and of the whispering presence of the first healer patient, ancient and still alive in the heartbeat beneath the forest floor. The dawn arrived over Hollow Vale like a soft sigh, diffused through the lingering mist and illuminating the forest in gentle silver light. The healer awoke slowly, the pendant resting against his chest, its faint pulse synchronizing with his own heartbeat, a quiet reminder that the day ahead would not be ordinary. The events of the previous days, the sickness, the manuscript, the chamber beneath the ancient oak, hung in his mind, each memory a thread in a tapestry he was only beginning to understand. Today, he felt, he would witness the convergence of past and present, the intersection of the valley's memory and the living pulse of life itself. He dressed with careful deliberation, drawing his cloak tightly around him as he stepped into the crisp morning air. The forest greeted him quietly, sunlight filtering through the canopy in lattices of gold, illuminating patches of moss and dew-covered leaves. Every detail seemed alive, each root and stone a note in an unseen symphony. The pendant hummed faintly against his chest, guiding him with a rhythm that seemed older than words, older than memory. He walked to the clearing where the ancient stones rested, their surfaces worn by centuries of wind, rain, and human touch. The hum beneath the soil grew stronger here, a subtle vibration that resonated with the pendant and pulsed through his very bones. He knelt among the stones, closing his eyes and letting the rhythm of the valley flow through him. With each breath, he felt the threads of time stretching backward, the presence of the first healer growing clearer, as if life itself remembered the careful hands, the whispered meditations, the patient gathering of herbs and roots. Suddenly, a subtle shift occurred. The air thickened, carrying the scent of wet earth and crushed herbs, and the mist rolled inward, coiling around the stones like a living being. A soft golden light began to radiate from the pedestal at the center of the circle, illuminating the carvings with an ethereal glow. The healer opened his eyes slowly, recognizing the convergence he had sensed in dreams. Past and present, memory and life, knowledge and spirit, merging into one quiet moment of revelation. He placed the pendant on the pedestal, and as it touched the stone, the carvings seemed to shimmer and shift. Spirals and flowing lines extended outward, their faint luminescence wrapping the clearing in a delicate network of light. A whisper filled the air, barely audible, like the soft rustling of leaves. A voice not entirely human, not entirely spirit, but something that belonged to the heartbeat of the valley itself. It spoke in fragments, words woven with feeling rather than sound. Balance, patience, listen, remember. The healer knelt in silence, allowing the words to settle into his consciousness. Images began to form in the glowing mist. The first healer, moving with deliberate grace, hands brushing over herbs, and roots whispering to the forest, tending both life and memory. He saw the sickness of centuries past, healed not by force, but by understanding. He saw rituals that aligned body, mind, and earth. He saw the pulse of the forest mirrored in the steady rhythm of human care. The pendant's glow intensified, synchronizing with these visions, until he felt as though he were both observer and participant, a part of the continuous flow of life through Hollow Vale. Hours seemed to pass and collapse simultaneously. The healer followed the glowing lines extending from the pedestal, tracing roots and spirals that led him deeper into understanding. He recognized patterns in the manuscript and the first healer's book, subtle connections between herbs, rituals, and the unseen currents of energy that moved through the veil. Each revelation carried a quiet emotional weight, a sense of awe, of belonging, of reverence for knowledge that was not written solely in words, but woven into the very fabric of life. A gentle wind swept through the clearing, brushing against his face, carrying with it whispers of the past and promises for the future. He understood that the sickness he had faced days before was not simply a trial, but a message, a reminder that balance must be maintained, that the valley's memory and the lives it sustained were inseparable. The pulse beneath the soil, the glow of the pendant, the carvings on the stones, all were connected, a living network of wisdom and care. The forest responded to his awareness. Leaves rustled softly, as if breathing, and roots beneath the clearing hummed in resonance with his heartbeat. He felt a profound empathy, a recognition that he was both teacher and student, healer and witness. The pendant pulsed brighter still, a steady, reassuring glow, and he realized that this convergence was not merely vision or dream, it was an awakening. Time had folded upon itself, allowing the knowledge of the first healer to merge with his own understanding, forming a continuity that bridged centuries. As night approached, the glow softened, fading into the mist as the forest exhaled. The healer remained kneeling among the stones, the pendant cool and still once more. Stars began to appear overhead, scattered across the sky like fragments of light pressed into velvet. He felt the pulse of the veil settle into calm rhythm, a gentle reminder that knowledge and balance required patience, attention, and humility. He returned to his cottage under the quiet sky, lantern in hand, the manuscript and first healer's book secure at his side. The events of the day lingered in his mind, the convergence, the visions, the whisper of the valley itself, and he understood more fully the responsibility he had accepted. Hollow Vale was alive in ways few could perceive. Its memory flowed through roots, soil, and wind, and he was now a guardian of that pulse. Sleep came gently that night, filled with visions of intertwined roots and glowing herbs, the rhythmic heartbeat of the valley, and the presence of the first healer moving silently among the trees. In dreams, past and present merged seamlessly, teaching him patience, reverence, and the quiet power of understanding. Hollow Vale rested, its secrets secure for now, awaiting the healer's careful guidance, and the pendant pulsed softly beside him, a steady heartbeat in the quiet of night. The dawn arrived softly over Hollow Vale, spilling a gentle silver light across the hills and threading through the tall trees of the whispering woods. Mist lingered in the hollows, curling delicately around roots and stones, and the air carried the faint scent of damp earth and herbs. The healer rose slowly, feeling the pulse of the valley through the soles of his feet and the hum of the pendant against his chest. Today, he knew, would call him to an experience unlike any he had known. A journey into the deep waters that held the memories and wisdom of generations past. He dressed with care, choosing garments that allowed him freedom of movement, and tucked the pendant beneath his cloak. Lantern in hand, he walked toward the hidden stream whose waters had been whispered about in the manuscript and in the first healer's writings. The forest greeted him with quiet acknowledgement. Leaves brushed gently against each other, birds flitted in measured patterns, and the wind carried a soft murmur that seemed almost like guidance. The stream was said to be a remnant of the ancient springs, waters that had witnessed centuries of life in Hollow Vale, the silent observer of every bloom, every harvest, and every whispered prayer. The path was familiar, yet cloaked in new significance. Each step a meditation, each breath attuning to the rhythm of the vale. As he approached, the waters shimmered faintly in the morning light, reflecting the sky and the surrounding trees in a soft liquid mirror. The surface was smooth, unbroken, yet he felt beneath it a pulse, subtle, steady, alive. The manuscript had described these waters as a medium for reflection, cleansing, and communion, a place where the healer might witness the valley's memory and gain insight into both sickness and balance. He knelt at the edge of the stream, hands trailing lightly across the surface. The water was cool and unexpectedly alive, carrying the scent of moss, wet roots, and minerals from deep underground. He whispered the meditative phrases noted in the first healer's book, focusing on the pulse beneath his feet, the glow of the pendant, and the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Slowly, deliberately, he submerged his hands, then his arms, feeling the water's gentle embrace, its subtle vibrations synchronizing with the valley's pulse. Closing his eyes, he leaned forward until his face brushed the surface, and a vision unfolded. He saw Hollow Vale, not as it was now, but as it had been centuries ago. Cottages built of stone and timber, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, villagers tending to crops, and animals with careful hands. He saw the first healer moving among them, weaving remedies from roots and herbs, whispering to the winds and listening to the stories of the soil. The vision shifted, showing sickness entering the village, subtle at first, then spreading, and the first healer responding, not with panic, but with observation, patience, and understanding of the pulse beneath every footstep, every breath, every rustling leaf. He felt the waters moving around him, pulling him gently into the memory, carrying both past and present into a quiet convergence. He glimpsed patterns of life, death, and renewal, the delicate balance maintained by attention, care, and reverence. Each image was accompanied by a faint vibration, the pulse of the valley, resonating through the stream, through the roots, and into his body. He understood that these waters were not merely physical. They were a conduit for the memory of the land itself, a living archive of both knowledge and emotion. Hours passed unnoticed. The healer immersed himself fully, submerging hands, arms, even knees, feeling the gentle tug of the current. He gathered herbs from the banks, testing combinations and observing subtle interactions in the water. Each plant responded differently, some releasing fragrance, others subtly altering the flow of light and shadow within the stream. He whispered quiet acknowledgements to the valley, to the first healer, to the waters themselves, allowing the pulse of life to guide him. He witnessed his own reflection in the water merge with visions of the first healer, seeing past and present align in a delicate overlay. He understood the sickness he had faced earlier not as a threat, but as a message, a disturbance in the rhythm of life, a call for careful observation and balance. The waters showed him remedies not only for the body, but for spirit and soil alike, combinations of herbs, rituals, and meditative practices that harmonize the unseen currents flowing through Hollow Vale. Evening approached, and he rose from the stream, the water dripping from his sleeves, the air cool against his skin. He felt renewed, not merely cleansed, but enriched with insight. The pulse beneath the valley settled into a gentle rhythm, a quiet acknowledgement of his presence and his care. The vision faded, leaving only the soft reflections on the water's surface and the lingering scent of earth and herbs. He wrapped himself in his cloak, the pendant warm against his chest, and began the walk back to his cottage, each step measured, deliberate, infused with reverence. Back at the cottage, he prepared infusions and poultices based on the insights gained from the waters. Villagers who approached with ailments found remedies that were subtle yet profoundly effective, drawing not only on herbs, but on attentiveness, presence, and the gentle alignment of body, spirit, and land. Even the most stubborn symptoms began to ease, not with force, but through patient observation, quiet ritual, and respect for the hidden currents that connected life in Hollow Vale. Night fell, and the healer sat by the hearth, pendant resting on the table, manuscript and first healer's book beside him. The forest outside whispered softly in the darkness, and the stream's waters carried memory and light in quiet ripples. He felt a deep, serene connection to the valley, the first healer, and the intricate patterns of life, health, and memory that flowed unseen yet persistent beneath every root, leaf, and stone. Sleep came slowly, filled with visions of ancient streams, intertwined roots, glowing herbs, and the quiet pulse of the vale, echoing through centuries and into his own heartbeat. The morning in Hollow Vale began with a gentle hush, the kind that carried a sense of expectation rather than alarm. Mist rolled over the hills, thin ribbons of silver drifting between the trees, and the faint scent of dew and earth lingered in the air. The healer rose slowly, the pendant warm against his chest, its pulse steady and quiet, resonating with the valley as if affirming that today would mark a turning point. The waters of memory, the chamber beneath the oak, and the first healer's teachings had all guided him here, and now the villagers themselves awaited the subtle power of his knowledge. He dressed carefully, pulling the cloak snug against the morning chill, and gathered the bundles of herbs, poultices, and tinctures he had prepared through the night. Each plant, each mixture, was chosen not only for its medicinal properties, but for the way it harmonized with the pulse of the valley, drawing on centuries of wisdom embedded in roots, soil, and water. The first healer's book rested beside him, pages open to passages that spoke of observation, balance, and quiet patience, principles that guided the healer as he stepped into the square of the village. Villagers had already begun to gather, moving slowly and with quiet hope. Mothers held children, elders leaned on walking sticks, and young men and women whispered among themselves, their faces drawn with worry, yet brightened by the healer's calm presence. He nodded gently, acknowledging them, and set his supplies on the stone well at the center of the square. The morning light fell softly across the scene, illuminating the mist and giving the day a kind of sacred clarity. He began with the sickest, a boy whose fever had not eased despite prior remedies. Kneeling beside him, the healer placed a cool compress on the child's brow, murmuring the gentle words of alignment from the manuscript. He administered the poultices, carefully measuring each herb, whispering to the valley and asking the pulse beneath the soil to guide the remedy. The boy's breathing slowed, color returning to his cheeks, and the mother's eyes glimmered with relief. Words spread quietly, a ripple of hope passing from one family to another, and the healer moved steadily from house to house, tending with meticulous care. Hours passed in a meditative rhythm, each patient a moment of observation, each remedy a note in the larger harmony of Hollow Vale. He saw subtle patterns in the illness, variations that spoke not only of physical imbalance, but of disturbances in the environment. The moisture of the soil, the freshness of the air, the unseen energy flowing through roots and streams. Adjusting his treatments, he combined herbs with careful timing, layered tinctures, and whispered meditations, allowing the valley's pulse to guide the healing process. Slowly, the sickness began to recede, leaving behind pale but recovering faces, brightening eyes, and the quiet exhalation of those who had been trapped in weakness. By midday, the square was alive with subtle motion. Villagers moved more freely, helping each other, carrying water, tending small chores, and watching the healer with curiosity and respect. He paused in the center, observing not only their physical recovery, but the restoration of rhythm in their daily lives. The small gestures of care, the sharing of bread and tea, the quiet laughter of children no longer burdened by fever. The valley itself seemed to exhale, the pulse beneath the soil steady, resonating through roots, stones, and the very air. The healer reflected on what he had learned in the chamber beneath the oak and in the waters of memory. Healing, he realized, was not simply a matter of applying remedies, but of listening, observing, and aligning with the living currents of the environment. The first healer's teachings were a guide, but the valley itself was the true teacher, offering insight through subtle signs, the sway of leaves, the hum of soil, the way light fell across the stones. He felt a profound gratitude for the continuity of wisdom, the quiet transmission of knowledge through generations, and the privilege of standing as a mediator between the land and its people. Evening approached, and the healer returned to the clearing beneath the ancient oak. The pendant glowed faintly in the lantern light, and he placed it carefully on the pedestal. The carvings shimmered softly, as if acknowledging the day's work, and the roots pulsed gently beneath the earth, a steady heartbeat of life and memory. He sat cross-legged, reviewing notes in the manuscript, arranging herbs in small patterns, and whispering words of alignment to the forest and valley. The sense of balance he had cultivated through careful observation and attentive care seemed to settle within the soil itself, a quiet affirmation that the lessons of the first healer continued to flow. Night fell, draping the valley in velvet darkness, and stars appeared overhead, scattered like fragments of light pressed into the sky. The healer walked slowly back to his cottage, each step deliberate, attuned to the pulse beneath the ground and the quiet rhythm of the village he had tended. Inside, he prepared a final infusion of herbs, both for himself and for the lingering recovery of the villagers. Sitting by the hearth, he allowed the quiet to fill him, the crackle of the fire, the faint rustle of the forest outside, the steady glow of the pendant, and reflected on the profound continuity of life, health, and memory that he had witnessed and preserved that day. Sleep came gently, carrying visions of the valley alive and thriving. He saw roots intertwining beneath cottages, streams flowing with memory and light, herbs glowing softly in hidden glades, and the first healer moving silently among the trees, observing, guiding, and watching over the delicate balance of Hollow Vale. He understood more fully than ever that his role was not merely to cure sickness, but to tend to the living memory of the land itself, to maintain harmony, and to honor the subtle rhythms that sustain generations. The pulse beneath the soil beat in quiet confirmation, and the healer drifted into dreams filled with light, mist, and the enduring heartbeat of Hollow Vale. Night fell softly over Hollow Vale, settling like a dark velvet cloak across the hills and forests. The stars peeked through the spaces between the branches, scattered and silent, reflecting faintly on the mist that lingered among the roots and stones. The healer stirred from his brief rest, feeling a pull in the valley, subtle yet insistent, as though the land itself were urging him to wake and walk its quiet paths once more. The pendant against his chest throbbed faintly, echoing the pulse beneath the soil, a gentle reminder that even in stillness, Hollow Vale held secrets waiting to be observed. He dressed quietly, the chill of night brushing against his skin, and took a lantern into his hands. The forest greeted him in near silence, every leaf and twig listening to his careful steps. Shadows moved across the forest floor, swaying in patterns created by the lantern's light, and the healer felt their presence not as threat, but as a subtle language of the valley. He followed the narrow path toward the ancient stones and the hollow beneath the great oak, sensing that tonight the pulse of the land might reveal lessons hidden in daylight. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, silver and ethereal. The hum beneath the soil was perceptible now, faint but steady, resonating through roots, stones, and the soles of his feet. The healer knelt among the stones, hands resting lightly on the cold surfaces, and allowed his awareness to stretch outward, listening to the rhythm of the valley. In the distance, the forest seemed to shift, leaves brushing against each other in patterns too deliberate to be random. There was movement in the shadows, subtle but insistent, and the healer knew that the energies of the land were awakening in response to his presence. As he settled, the pendant's glow intensified, illuminating carvings in the stones that seemed to shift under the moonlight. The patterns swirled, spirals extending outward, connecting the earth, the trees, and the unseen currents beneath the forest floor. A whisper drifted through the clearing, soft and elusive, carrying fragments of memory, knowledge of past healings, the steps of the first healer, the ebb and flow of life across generations. The voice was not audible in the ordinary sense, but felt within the chest and bones, a resonance that aligned with the pulse of the valley. The healer leaned closer to the pedestal at the center, placing a hand gently upon it. The glow from the pendant spread outward, revealing the hollow at the base of the oak more clearly than ever before. Something had shifted in the shadows. Subtle shapes, faintly luminous, coalescing into forms that suggested presence, not of humans, but of guardians long tied to the forest's memory. Roots twisted with intention, leaves swayed in silent rhythm, and he realized that these were remnants of the ancient force the first healer had respected and understood, energies that were not easily perceived by ordinary senses, yet essential for maintaining balance in the veil. He knelt in quiet meditation, observing the subtle movements in the shadows, and allowed himself to feel the pulse of the unseen energies. Patterns emerged, rhythms that spoke of cycles, of life and death, of growth and renewal. He glimpsed the times when the valley had been disrupted by sickness, neglect, or human interference, and saw the first healer responding, not through force, but through careful alignment, awareness, and gentle restoration. These were lessons that could only be perceived in stillness and attentiveness, a communion with forces older than the oldest tree. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The forest seemed alive with watchful presence, yet never threatening. The healer traced symbols in the soil with his fingertips, whispered quiet invocations of balance, and felt the energies settle in response. Roots pulsing, stones resonating, leaves quivering softly. Shadows lengthened and contracted in rhythm with his breathing, the hum beneath the soil rising and falling like the chest of the earth itself. The valley communicated through subtle shifts, patterns, and vibrations, teaching lessons that could not be written in ink or spoken aloud. A sudden shift occurred near the edge of the clearing. The mist coiled and shimmered, forming shapes that suggested ancient beings, guardians of knowledge, their presence silent but perceptible. The healer remained still, observing, aware that any sudden movement might disrupt the fragile alignment. He sensed a subtle acknowledgement in the air, a passing of awareness from the guardians to him, a quiet recognition of his dedication, care, and attunement to the pulse of Hollow Vale. It was not an interaction of words, but a sharing of understanding, a moment where past, present, and the unseen energy of the land converged. The pendant pulsed in sync with this realization, warmth spreading through the healer's chest. He understood that the valley's guardians were not spirits in the conventional sense, but extensions of life itself, rooted in soil, water, air, and memory flowing through the energies of the forest and into the living presence of every being in Hollow Vale. This revelation carried both serenity and responsibility. The healer's role was to maintain this balance, to continue the practices of the first healer, and to act as a bridge between the village, the forest, and the deeper energies that sustained both. As night slowly waned toward dawn, the shadows softened, the mist lifted, and the forest exhaled in gentle rhythm. The healer remained kneeling for a long moment, letting the quiet settle within him, aligning his heartbeat with the pulse of the valley. He rose slowly, lantern in hand, and walked back along the forest path toward the village, each step deliberate and infused with reverence. The pendant glowed softly against his chest. The air carried the faint scent of moss and herbs, and he felt a profound sense of continuity between past and present, human and land, seen and unseen. By the time he returned to his cottage, the first hints of sunlight were brushing the valley with gold. He placed the pendant and the manuscript on the table, preparing for the new day with a sense of calm purpose. Hollow Veil had revealed another layer of its mysteries, teaching him the subtle rhythms of guardianship, observation, and patience. The healer knew that this night had deepened his understanding of the valley, the first healer's wisdom, and the intricate weave of life, memory, and care that connected every root, stream, and stone. He settled by the hearth, the quiet of the forest filtering through open windows. Sleep arrived slowly, carrying visions of shadows shifting in patterns, roots intertwined with memory, and the guardians of the veil moving silently through mist and moonlight. The pulse beneath the earth was steady, comforting, and constant, a heartbeat that echoed through the healer's own chest, reminding him that the balance of Hollow Veil was both fragile and enduring, and that his role, patient and careful, would continue through every day and every night to come. The morning air was crisp as Hollow Veil began to awaken, soft light spilling across the rolling hills and filtering through the mist that lingered among the trees. The healer rose slowly, the pendant resting against his chest, its gentle pulse attuned to the rhythm of the valley. He felt a quiet stirring within him, a sense that the day ahead would take him beyond the familiar paths, into corners of the forest and hills that he had not yet explored. Today, he would walk where few had tread, following subtle signs left by both nature and the first healer, seeking wisdom hidden in the folds of the land. He dressed with care, wrapping himself in the cloak that had carried him safely through many nights and mornings, and tucked the pendant beneath it. Lantern in hand, he stepped into the forest, noticing how the light danced over moss-covered stones and dew-laden leaves. Each step was deliberate, a meditation, each breath drawn slowly, attuned to the subtle vibrations in the soil and air. Birds moved silently through the branches, their calls faint, as if respecting the healer's purpose, and the wind carried whispers of movement from deep within the trees. Following a narrow, overgrown path that wound toward the hills beyond the village, he noticed small signs of life that had gone unnoticed before. Delicate clusters of herbs growing between rocks, roots twisting in intricate patterns beneath the earth, and the faint tracks of creatures that moved quietly through the underbrush. Some of these were ordinary forest animals, yet others suggested beings the first healer had noted in his manuscripts, elusive, subtle presences that blended almost seamlessly with the natural world, guardians of the valley's deeper knowledge. He paused beside a small spring, its waters cool and clear, reflecting sunlight in delicate, shifting patterns. Kneeling, he allowed his hands to hover above the surface, feeling the faint pulse of the underground currents. Here, the waters whispered of events long past, the planting of seeds by villagers centuries ago, the careful tending of the forest, and the subtle ebb and flow of life in the vale. He traced the edges of the pool with his fingers, noting the herbs that grew nearby and the unusual shapes of certain stones, their edges worn smooth in patterns suggesting both human and natural artistry. Moving further along the path, the healer came upon a grove where sunlight pierced the canopy in thin beams, illuminating a carpet of moss and ferns. Within the grove were unusual flora, plants whose leaves shimmered with a faint silver hue, and whose flowers released a delicate, almost imperceptible fragrance. He recognized some from the first healer's notes, herbs that could be used in subtle remedies, Their potency increased when harvested under specific lunar or solar conditions. He collected small samples carefully, mindful of the balance and of the energy that seemed to flow through the grove itself. As he ventured deeper into the hills, he observed signs of the valley's ancient guardians, creatures that moved with grace and caution, sometimes visible in the corner of his eye, sometimes suggested only by disturbed leaves or soft sounds. Some were small, fox-like animals with fur patterned in ways that reminded him of carvings in the oak chamber. Others were birds with delicate, almost translucent feathers, their songs harmonizing with the gentle hum of the valley's pulse. He understood that these were not merely animals, but living reminders of the connection between the land, its memory, and those who had cared for it across centuries. In a shaded hollow, he discovered faint traces of symbols etched into stones partially buried beneath moss, spirals, lines, and flowing curves that mirrored those in the first healer's manuscripts. Kneeling, he traced the carvings with his fingers, feeling the resonance of the earth beneath and the subtle hum of the unseen energies. He whispered meditations, allowing the pulse of the land to guide him in understanding, and realized that these markings were a form of communication, a way for past caretakers of the valley to leave messages for those who were attuned to listen. The day wore on as he climbed higher, following subtle signs, listening to the valley and observing the interplay of flora, fauna, and the unseen currents that seemed to shape both. Each discovery, unfamiliar herbs, tracks of elusive creatures, carved symbols, offered insight not only into practical remedies, but into the philosophy of life that had guided generations of healers. He felt the continuity of care stretching back centuries, a quiet acknowledgement of the delicate balance between human presence and the natural world, and he understood more deeply the first healer's insistence on patience, observation, and reverence. By late afternoon, he reached a ridge overlooking Hollow Vale. The view was breathtaking. The village nestled among the hills, forests spreading outward in green waves, the river winding like a silver thread through the valley floor. The light was soft, golden, carrying warmth, yet also revealing shadows that spoke of hidden corners still waiting to be explored. He paused, allowing the pulse of the valley to settle within him, reflecting on the lessons of the day, the subtle connections, the hidden presences, the quiet wisdom of nature and memory intertwined. Descending back toward the village, the healer carried small bundles of herbs, sketches of symbols, and impressions of creatures and plants he had observed. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the guidance of the first healer, and for the pulse of Hollow Vale itself, which had revealed these mysteries to him in its own deliberate rhythm. The path back was quiet, the forest calm, and each step felt like a reaffirmation of his role: observer, mediator, and guardian of life's subtle currents. As night approached, he returned to his cottage, the pendant glowing softly against his chest, a heartbeat in rhythm with the valley's pulse. He laid out the herbs, sketches, and notes, preparing to study them and incorporate their wisdom into his ongoing practice. The forest whispered beyond the walls, leaves brushing in the cool night air, and he felt the deep continuity of Hollow Vale stretching through time, connecting past, present, and future. Sleep came gently, filled with visions of silver-tinged plants, elusive creatures, and the unseen patterns of the valley's life, a reminder that the lessons of today would guide him in the quiet work of tomorrow. The morning arrived in Hollow Vale with a gentle glow, sunlight filtering through the mist and casting delicate patterns across the village square. The villagers moved slowly, yet purposefully, preparing for a festival that had long been celebrated but seldom fully understood in its deeper meaning. Today, the healer felt, would not only mark a tradition, but also offer an opportunity to harmonize his knowledge with the life of the community. Lanterns were hung, herbs were woven into garlands, and the scent of fresh bread and baked roots filled the air, mingling with the faint fragrance of wildflowers gathered from the forest edge. The healer dressed carefully, selecting garments of soft linen and wool, colors muted, yet resonant with the natural hues of the veil. The pendant beneath his cloak pulsed gently, steady and reassuring, as if echoing the rhythm of the valley itself and offering guidance for the day ahead. He carried bundles of herbs, tinctures, and prepared remedies, not for the purpose of illness alone, but for the subtle support of balance, energy, and focus among the villagers during the festival. He understood that celebration, like healing, required attunement, attention to detail, awareness of the unseen currents of emotion and energy, and the careful weaving of human and natural rhythms. As he stepped into the square, he was greeted by children chasing each other among the flower garlands, elders arranging ceremonial stones in patterns that reflected ancient designs, and families exchanging quiet smiles and gentle laughter. The atmosphere was infused with anticipation, not of spectacle, but of participation, an awareness that the festival was both communal and spiritual, a delicate harmony of past and present. The healer placed his supplies at the center of the square, arranging them with care while observing the flow of movement among the villagers. He noticed subtle signs of imbalance in some: fatigue from early labor, minor ailments, tension in muscles, and weariness in the eyes. These he intended to address quietly, integrating care with celebration. The first rituals began with the offering of herbs to the village altar, a simple stone platform adorned with garlands, candles, and symbols etched long ago. Villagers knelt in measured rhythm, placing sprigs of rosemary, thyme, and sage, while murmuring phrases of gratitude. The healer joined them, placing small bundles of his own preparation, whispering guidance in the ancient words of the first healer, and allowing the subtle vibrations of the valley to flow through the offerings. He could feel the pulse of the earth intensifying, roots beneath the square resonating with the collective intention of the villagers. As the day progressed, he moved among the people, administering gentle remedies and guidance. A mother with a child who had been listless through the week received a fragrant infusion, calming yet invigorating, which restored energy and ease. An elder whose joints ached was guided to simple movements, reinforced with herbal compresses, each touch deliberate and measured. The healer noticed the subtle alignment that occurred, not only in individual bodies, but in the flow of interaction. Laughter returned, eyes brightened, gestures became lighter, and a communal rhythm emerged, mirroring the quiet pulse of the vale itself. The festival continued with music and storytelling, the melodies of flutes, drums, and stringed instruments weaving through the square, carrying both joy and contemplation. The healer observed how sound, rhythm, and vibration influenced the bodies and spirits of the villagers, harmonizing with the herbal infusions and movements he had facilitated. Children danced, adults moved with ease, and even the elders, seated among the ceremonial stones, felt the subtle resonance of balance flowing through them. Every element, herbs, music, ritual, and human presence melded into a quiet choreography, orchestrated by careful observation, intuition, and connection to the valley. At midday, the healer led a collective meditation, instructing the villagers to close their eyes and feel the pulse of Hollow Vale beneath their feet. The pendant at his chest glowed faintly, resonating with the energy flowing through the square, roots, stones, and earth. He guided them in slow, mindful breaths, allowing awareness to extend beyond individual bodies into a shared rhythm of life. Some swayed with the motion of the forest, others visualized the flow of streams and growth of herbs, and all participants felt a subtle sense of unity with the valley, the ancestors, and the life that pulsed through every leaf and stone. Evening arrived with a golden softness, lanterns glowing in the twilight, candles flickering along the edges of the square. The festival reached its gentle crescendo, offerings placed, music lingering, and villagers resting in reflective contentment. The healer moved quietly among them, ensuring balance remained, observing the continued harmony of body, mind, and spirit. The pendant's glow dimmed slightly as the pulse of the valley settled, confirming that the lessons of the day had been absorbed not only by him, but by the community. By nightfall, the healer returned to the clearing beneath the ancient oak, the pendant warm against his chest. He knelt before the pedestal, reflecting on the day's events. The subtle interplay of ritual, care, and observation and the deeper understanding that the festival had provided. Hollow Vale had revealed the importance of communal awareness, the interplay of joy and care, and the ways in which tradition, when harmonized with attentive presence, could support both body and spirit. Sleep came gently that night, filled with visions of dancing lights, intertwined roots, fragrant herbs, and the shared heartbeat of a village aligned with the pulse of the land, a rhythm that would endure long after the festival concluded. The night settled over Hollow Vale with a softness that seemed almost tangible, folding the village and the surrounding hills into a blanket of quiet. Stars glimmered faintly through the thin veil of clouds, casting silver streaks across the forest canopy. The healer rose in the calm hours before dawn, the pendant against his chest warm and steady, its pulse guiding him toward a path he had not yet traveled. Tonight, he would leave the familiar trails of the village behind, venturing into the hidden grove deep within the ancient forest, a place whispered about in the first Healeress manuscripts, a sanctuary of secrets and forgotten remedies. He dressed in muted linen and wool, wrapping the cloak tightly against the chill, and gathered his lantern, bundles of herbs, and small instruments for study. Every step was deliberate as he followed the narrow winding path leading out of the village. The forest alive with subtle sounds, rustling leaves, distant hoots of owls, the soft scurry of small creatures through underbrush. Shadows danced in the lantern's glow, and he paused often to attune himself, placing a hand lightly on the earth, feeling the pulse of the valley beneath his feet. The hidden grove, he knew, was not merely a physical place, but a confluence of energy, memory, and life, a locus where the valley's wisdom flowed most clearly. The path led him beneath ancient trees, their roots twisting over stones, creating natural archways that guided him silently forward. Small streams, nearly invisible under moss and fern, meandered along his route, their waters carrying the quiet memory of centuries. He knelt at one such spring, tracing the edges with his fingers, feeling the pulse of currents that nourished the plants and trees, sensing the subtle language of water that spoke of balance and life. Here, the first healer had written, "The valley's secrets could be heard most clearly, but only by those patient enough to listen, observant enough to notice the delicate interplay of flora, fauna, and soil." Deeper into the forest, he began to encounter plants and fungi unknown in the village, each offering faint fragrances or subtle luminescence in the lantern's light. Some were herbs noted in the manuscripts but rare in cultivation. Others were entirely new, their forms intricate, leaves delicate, and blooms emitting scents that seemed to shift with the angle of observation. He carefully collected samples, labeling them in soft ink and taking note of soil, moisture, and surrounding vegetation, aware that understanding their properties required both study and reverence. The forest seemed to acknowledge his careful steps, rustling gently as if guiding him toward clusters of particular interest. Small creatures moved silently among the roots and underbrush, foxes with fur patterned in spirals, birds with feathers tinted silver and gold, and insects whose wings shimmered faintly like dew. The healer observed without intrusion, noting patterns in behavior, dietary preferences, and interactions with plants. He understood that these creatures were part of the valley's healing network, maintaining ecological balance and offering subtle insight into the properties of the flora. Some were playful, approaching cautiously to observe his lantern's glow. Others remained hidden, visible only in glimpses, reminding him of the delicate harmony of life that he must respect. In a clearing half hidden by ferns and moss-covered stones, he discovered what he had been seeking, the heart of the hidden grove. A small circular pond reflected the moonlight, its surface smooth, yet vibrating faintly with unseen currents. Around it grew herbs with patterns and colors unlike any he had seen before, their leaves arranged in spirals and overlapping layers, blossoms emitting soft, shifting luminescence. Kneeling at the water's edge, he traced the edges with his fingers and felt a subtle resonance. The pulse of the valley concentrated here, carrying the memory of centuries of growth, care, and quiet observation. He arranged his collected samples in careful order, cross-referencing them with notes from the manuscripts. Slowly, he began to experiment, combining leaves, roots, and petals in small infusions, noting the subtle changes in aroma, texture, and reaction when introduced to water from the pond. Some combinations released gentle vapors that carried faint vibrations through the air. Others shifted the pond's reflected light, creating subtle patterns that seemed almost like communication. He whispered the meditative phrases of alignment, letting the valley's pulse guide him, and discovered interactions that suggested new remedies, methods of supporting health that relied not only on physical properties, but on the harmony of energy, rhythm, and intention. Hours passed unnoticed. He observed the delicate balance between the flora and fauna, noting which plants attracted certain creatures and how the movement of animals influenced the growth of herbs. Patterns emerged, combinations of herbs that amplified natural energies, flowers that enhanced focus and clarity when inhaled, roots that aligned with the pulse of the valley to restore strength. The hidden grove was alive with teaching, offering insights that could not be found in any manuscript, only through patient observation and careful integration of knowledge, intuition, and reverence for life itself. As the first hint of dawn touched the forest, the healer rose from the pond's edge, lantern swinging gently, the pendant warm against his chest. He reflected on the discoveries of the night, new herbs, interactions with creatures, the subtle language of the forest, and the ways in which the valley communicated through forms, scents, and vibrations. Each element was a piece of the puzzle, a thread in the larger tapestry of Hollow Vale's wisdom. And he understood that these insights would enrich not only his practice, but the health, balance, and harmony of the village for years to come. Returning to the village, the healer carried carefully wrapped bundles of samples and detailed sketches of patterns and symbols, the forest behind him humming quietly, as if offering farewell. He paused often, observing small signs, birds in silent flight, rustling leaves, the glow of moss under his lantern, and felt a deep gratitude for the guidance, patience, and trust the hidden grove had offered. Upon reaching the edge of Hollow Vale, he looked back toward the hills, the soft light of morning spilling over the forest, and felt the pulse of the valley steady within him, a living memory that would guide every step, decision, and healing in the days to come. That night, by the hearth in his cottage, he began arranging the collected herbs, preparing small infusions, and documenting the intricate details of the hidden grove. Sleep came slowly, filled with visions of silver-tinted leaves, luminous blossoms, the quiet movement of unseen creatures, and the gentle pulse of life that stretched through every root, stream, and stone in Hollow Vale. The healer dreamed of harmony, of discovery, and of the delicate responsibility of understanding and maintaining the unseen currents that sustained the valley, carrying the wisdom of the forest into the hearts of the people he served. The morning broke over Hollow Vale with a quiet clarity, sunlight spilling through misty hills and illuminating dew-laden meadows. The healer awoke with a sense of purpose, the pendant resting warm against his chest, its pulse steady and in tune with the rhythm of the valley. News had reached him during the night. Several villagers had fallen ill unexpectedly, symptoms unfamiliar and rapidly spreading. It was a challenge unlike any he had encountered before, one that would require not only knowledge of herbs and remedies, but a deep attunement to the pulse of Hollow Vale itself. He dressed carefully, selecting muted linens that allowed freedom of movement and carrying bundles of herbs, tinctures, and instruments of observation. Each step from his cottage to the village square was deliberate, his senses alert to subtle shifts in air, sound, and energy. The mist clung to trees and roots, and the forest seemed unusually still, as if aware of the challenge ahead. At the center of the square, he found families gathered, worried faces, trembling hands, and eyes heavy with fear. The healer took a deep breath, feeling the pulse beneath the soil, the unseen currents of the valley that would guide his approach. The first case he examined was a young woman whose breath was shallow, skin pale yet tinged with an unusual flush along her cheeks. He noted her symptoms quietly, placing hands gently on her pulse and forehead, whispering meditative phrases of alignment. The herbs he had collected from the hidden grove the previous night were now crucial. Silver-tinted leaves, luminescent petals, and roots known for subtle yet potent restorative properties. He prepared infusions carefully, observing their reaction to water, temperature, and the energy in the air. Each combination, each gentle touch, was guided by both observation and intuition, honed through years of study and attunement with Hollow Vale. Hours passed in steady rhythm as he moved from house to house, attending the sick. He noticed patterns. The illness seemed tied not to any single cause, but to disruption in the balance of the valley's subtle energies. Moisture in certain parts of the forest had increased after recent rains. Certain herbs had grown with unusual vigor, and small animals had been moving erratically. Drawing upon the lessons of the hidden grove, he combined remedies with careful timing, whispering alignments to the soil, water, and air, inviting the unseen currents of Hollow Vale to assist in restoration. By midday, the healer began to see improvement. The young woman's breathing steadied, her flush softened, and her hands relaxed in the gentle warmth of the remedies. Children who had been listless played quietly at the edges of their homes. Elders moved with more ease, and families exchanged subtle smiles of hope. The village's pulse, once strained by illness and fear, began to harmonize, responding to the healer's interventions, the energy of the hidden grove, and the underlying currents that connected every root, stone, and stream. Yet the challenge was not fully overcome. There were subtle residual effects in some villages: fatigue, lingering aches, and quiet tension that could disrupt recovery if not addressed. The healer realized that the valley itself needed restoration, not merely individual bodies. He moved to the central square, preparing an array of herbal bundles and arranging them according to patterns observed in the hidden grove. Villagers gathered cautiously, watching as he demonstrated gentle movements, breathing exercises, and methods of aligning with the subtle energies. The pendant glowed faintly against his chest, amplifying his focus, and the valley responded. Roots beneath the square pulsed, the wind carried whispers through the leaves, and the soil seemed to vibrate softly with life. He guided the villagers through slow, mindful movements, connecting them with the pulse beneath their feet, the hum of water from the river, and the resonance of the forest. Children and elders, young men and women, all participated with attentive curiosity. Each inhalation, exhalation, and step aligned with the unseen currents, creating a shared rhythm that restored not only the body, but the collective spirit. The healer observed subtle signs of energy returning to balance, color brightening in cheeks, muscles relaxing, eyes clearing. By the late afternoon, the illness had abated significantly, and a serene calm settled over Hollow Vale. As evening approached, the healer reflected on the events of the day. The trial had revealed both the fragility and resilience of life in the valley, the intricate interplay of humans, flora, fauna, and unseen energies. He understood more deeply the wisdom of the first healer. Healing was not a matter of force or speed, but of observation, patience, alignment, and reverence for the subtle rhythms that sustained life. The Hidden Grove's teachings, combined with the pulse of the village and the care of the community, had restored balance, proving that knowledge, attention, and harmony were more powerful than any singular remedy. Night fell over Hollow Vale, gentle and encompassing. Lanterns glowed softly in cottages, the river reflected silver light, and the forest whispered in quiet resonance. The healer returned to the clearing beneath the ancient oak, pendant warm and steady, laying out herbs and notes with care. He knelt, whispering gratitude for the valley's guidance, for the hidden grove, and for the resilience of the villagers who had participated in the healing. Sleep came slowly, filled with visions of pulsating roots, luminescent petals, and the shared heartbeat of Hollow Vale, a rhythm of life and balance that would endure through generations. In the quiet of the night, he understood that his role was now fully realized, not merely as a healer of individuals, but as a guardian of the valley's harmony, a mediator between human life and the subtle, enduring currents that sustained the land. The trial of the day had solidified knowledge, deepened wisdom, and strengthened the bond between Hollow Vale, its people, and the ancient lessons carried through centuries by the first healer. The valley of Hollow Vale lay under a blanket of dusk, its familiar hills and meadows softened by the waning light. A cool wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of moss, wet earth, and distant herbs, as though the forest itself was whispering secrets to those who would listen. The healer stood at the edge of the village, lantern in hand, pendant resting against his chest, its faint pulse guiding him toward paths unknown. Tonight, he would venture farther than before, beyond the well-trodden forest trails, seeking the subtle signs of an illness that had begun to stir quietly in the outskirts of the vale. He moved with deliberate care, feet treading softly on moss-covered roots, eyes scanning the underbrush for movement or irregularity. Owls called faintly from the treetops, and small animals rustled unseen among the fallen leaves. Each sound, each scent, was a note in the symphony of the valley, carrying information the healer had learned to interpret over countless nights of patient observation. He paused beside a silver-hued stream, dipping his hands into the cool water, feeling its pulse, and noting subtle changes in the flow, displacements of algae, patterns of sediment that suggested activity upstream. The forest communicated in whispers, and he listened attentively. Following faint tracks and subtle shifts in the vegetation, the healer came upon signs he had not anticipated. Clusters of wilted herbs, unusual patterns of leaf discoloration, and small creatures moving erratically along the edges of the clearing. Some plants bore tiny lesions, subtle but distinct, while others seemed to shiver in response to unseen currents. Kneeling, he traced the roots with careful fingers, noting the interaction of soil, moisture, and plant energy. This was not a common ailment, he realized. It was a disturbance of the valley's subtle balance, a signal that life and energy were being shifted, perhaps by a chain of natural causes or an unseen external influence. He lit a small incense of sage and silverleaf, allowing the smoke to drift gently over the affected area. Closing his eyes, he attuned himself to the pulse beneath his hands, feeling the flow of energy through roots, soil, and the small creatures moving nearby. He murmured quiet phrases of alignment, learned from the first healer, and waited. The forest responded subtly. Leaves fluttered in a precise rhythm, small birds shifted their positions, and a gentle hum seemed to vibrate beneath the earth. He had read of such phenomena in the manuscripts but never witnessed them so directly. Tonight, the signs were undeniable, guiding him toward the source of imbalance. Hours passed as he moved deeper into the shadowed woods, carefully mapping the disturbances, collecting samples, and observing the behavior of flora and fauna. Some animals avoided certain plants entirely, while others were inexplicably drawn to them. Patterns emerged, almost imperceptible but consistent. Streams where the water's current had shifted slightly, mosses growing denser along one bank, and fungi forming in spiraled clusters that mirrored ancient glyphs in the healer's manuscripts. He noted every detail, understanding that true insight required patience, meticulous observation, and respect for the valley's silent language. At the heart of the disturbance, he discovered a cluster of plants and stones, arranged in a pattern that suggested an energy misalignment. Kneeling, he examined the soil and water, noting subtle chemical changes, traces of mineral imbalance, and shifts in temperature along the roots. Using herbs collected from the hidden grove, he prepared a series of infusions and poultices, applying them delicately to affected plants and areas of soil. He guided the nearby animals with gentle movements, whispering alignment phrases to harmonize their energy with the restored flow. It was a delicate choreography. Each gesture, breath, and placement had to be precise to restore balance without imposing force. The night deepened, and the healer moved with care, responding to feedback from the valley. Streams adjusted their flow in response to his infusions, leaves gradually regained their natural hue, and small creatures began to move with steadier, more natural rhythms. The subtle pulse beneath the earth, once disrupted, began to synchronize with his own breath and heartbeat, creating a resonance that seemed to extend through the forest and toward the village. It was a quiet but profound restoration, the kind of subtle miracle that only careful observation, respect, and intuition could accomplish. By the faint light of the rising moon, the healer observed the results. Plants stood taller, leaves shimmered with renewed vitality, and animals moved freely, their behaviors returning to patterns aligned with the valley's natural rhythm. He paused, placing a hand upon the soil, feeling the pulse steady beneath him, and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. This night had not been about curing a single illness, but about understanding the interconnectedness of life, energy, and balance in Hollow Vale. The first healer's lessons resonated clearly. The subtle disturbances of life must be observed patiently, interpreted attentively, and harmonized gently. As he made his way back to the village, lantern swaying gently and cloak brushing against the undergrowth, he noted the signs of life restored in his wake. Dew glimmered on leaves, the scent of herbs was renewed, and the soft rustle of forest creatures carried a sense of calm assurance. Approaching the village edge, he felt the pendant pulse more steadily, confirming that the valley's energy had been realigned, and that the lessons of the night would inform not only his remedies, but his understanding of life's fragile interconnections. Returning to his cottage before dawn, he laid out his notes, sketches, and samples, reflecting on the night's observations. Sleep came slowly, each breath attuned to the pulse of the valley, carrying visions of moonlit leaves, silver streams, and delicate creatures whose movements had revealed the hidden signals of balance. He dreamed of connections, of the invisible currents linking plants, animals, and humans, and of the quiet responsibility to observe, interpret, and harmonize. Hollow Vale slept peacefully beneath the first light of day, unaware yet profoundly touched by the healer's careful attention, as if the forest itself had exhaled in relief, restored to its natural rhythm. The morning light filtered softly through the windows of the healer's cottage, casting long, delicate shadows across the wooden floor. The village of Hollow Vale stirred gently, birds calling faintly from the edge of the forest, and the low hum of the river threading through the vale. The healer sat quietly, the pendant warm against his chest, reflecting the soft glow of early sunlight, and allowed himself a rare moment of pause. The nights of exploration, observation, and careful healing had left him both fulfilled and contemplative, and today he sought to reconcile the wisdom of the forest, the hidden grove, and the valley with the memories that lingered within him. He closed his eyes, inhaling the faint, familiar scents of herbs, earth, and river mist. The first whispers of memory came unbidden, the small, worn hands of his mother tending to a tiny garden at dawn, the scent of oak and rain in the hills of his childhood, the quiet, steady rhythm of a village long ago, where every breath seemed linked to the pulse of the land. He remembered the old healer of that place, a figure half seen, whose soft voice and patient guidance had sparked a curiosity that now guided him through Hollow Vale. Each memory carried a subtle lesson, a rhythm or cadence that resonated with the valley's pulse and reminded him that healing was as much about the spirit and heart as it was about herbs, roots, and poultices. Rising slowly, he walked to the edge of the clearing behind his cottage, where the light of the sun and the shade of ancient trees intertwined. He placed hands on the moss-covered stones, feeling the familiar thrum of life beneath his palms, and reflected on the subtle parallels between his own past and the lessons of the hidden grove. The shapes of leaves and flowers, the movements of small animals, the currents in streams, all mirrored the intricate patterns of memory, moments of joy and sorrow, loss and discovery, care and attention. He understood with quiet clarity that personal history was woven into the fabric of the land, and that by acknowledging it, he could attune himself more fully to the flow of life around him. He thought of the villagers, of the lives he had touched through his remedies, and of the collective memory that each person carried. Every gesture of care, every shared smile, every quiet act of attentiveness was a thread linking present to past, individual to community. He realized that his own recollections, the joys and losses, the quiet sorrows and moments of wonder, were instruments in this subtle orchestra, allowing him to understand more deeply the needs and rhythms of those he sought to aid. Personal memory, he understood, was not mere nostalgia, but a living compass, guiding thought, action, and intuition in harmony with the valley's pulse. Hours passed as he moved through the cottage and garden, tending to small plants, adjusting infusions, and preparing remedies, each act carried out with deliberate mindfulness. Each leaf he touched, each root he examined, recalled a lesson learned in childhood, the importance of observation, of patience, of listening to the unspoken. He recalled the rhythm of his mother's hands in the soil, the way she moved slowly and attentively, and he realized that this same rhythm had guided him through the forest, the hidden grove, and the recent trials of the valley. He smiled quietly, understanding that memory and experience, when harmonized, could reveal wisdom beyond the visible, insight beyond the measurable, and connection beyond the immediate senses. By late afternoon, the healer ventured into the village, observing and noting small details previously overlooked. The subtle posture of a laborer carrying wood, the uneven breath of a child playing by the river, the careful placement of stones by an elder arranging herbs. Each observation echoed memories long stored within him, subtle cues learned from the rhythms of people, plants, and animals in the past. He whispered alignment phrases softly, combining his knowledge of herbs and energy with intuitive gestures learned from experience and memory, creating a gentle but profound harmony that touched body, mind, and spirit. As evening approached, the healer returned to the clearing behind his cottage, where the sun cast long, golden beams across the valley. He knelt on the moss, pendant warm against his chest, eyes closed, listening to the pulse of the land and his own heartbeat. In that quiet, reflective moment, memory and experience merged. The hidden grove, the distant illness, the rhythm of the village, and his own personal history coalesced into a deep understanding. He recognized that healing, wisdom, and insight were inseparable from memory and reflection, that every moment, joyful or sorrowful, carried a lesson waiting to be harmonized with the pulse of life. The night descended with a serene hush, lanterns glowing in cottages, river flowing silently, and the forest settling into quiet resonance. The healer prepared a small infusion of silverleaf and moonflower, sipping it slowly as he observed the valley. He allowed himself to drift into contemplation, memories intertwining with visions of the hidden grove, the pulse of the village, and the lessons of the first healer. Sleep came gently, carrying him through a tapestry of light and shadow past, and present memory and wisdom, leaving him wrapped in a profound, peaceful understanding of the valley, its people, and the intricate currents of life he had learned to observe and honor. The dawn broke slowly over Hollow Vale, the soft, golden light spilling across the hills and meadows, casting long, gentle shadows over the cottages and riverbanks. The village, still wrapped in the quiet of early morning, seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that today would mark a subtle yet profound transformation. The healer stepped from his cottage, the pendant warm against his chest, and breathed deeply, feeling the pulse of the valley beneath his feet. Each movement was deliberate, slow, and attentive, as though the earth itself were guiding him toward his final task, the integration of all he had learned into the life of the village he had come to cherish. He moved first to the river's edge, where children often played, and observed the delicate flow of water over moss-covered stones. The river had shifted subtly during recent rains, carrying with it changes that affected the nearby herbs and plants. He knelt, tracing the edges of the stream with his fingers, sensing the subtle currents and rhythms that had gone unnoticed before. With careful hands, he arranged small bundles of restorative herbs along the banks, whispering phrases of alignment and healing that carried the wisdom of the hidden grove. Slowly, imperceptibly, the water seemed to respond, its flow smoothing, eddies calming, reflecting the first light of morning with a clarity that felt almost sacred. The villagers began to stir, noticing the healer moving through their homes and gardens, quiet but purposeful. He visited each household, observing symptoms both of body and spirit: fatigue, lingering tension, subtle imbalances that could be traced to disrupted rhythms of daily life, or misalignments in the natural energies of the vale. With soft, deliberate movements, he applied remedies, guided not only by herbs, but by the deep understanding of the Valley-S pulse he had cultivated. Each infusion, each touch, was accompanied by a gentle alignment of body, breath, and energy, creating a resonance that spread quietly from one home to the next. He paused in the central square, sunlight now bright on the cobblestones, and observed the villagers as they carried out their morning routines. There was a rhythm here, a subtle dance of life that had grown slightly unsteady over time. But he knew that with careful guidance, the balance could be restored. He laid out small clusters of herbs and roots in deliberate patterns and invited the villagers to participate. With quiet instruction, he guided them in simple gestures, meditative breathing, and the mindful arrangement of plants, aligning human activity with the deeper currents of the valley. At first hesitant, they soon followed, drawn by the gentle clarity of his movements and the serene presence he radiated. Throughout the day, he moved from place to place, observing, adjusting, and guiding. He noted the interplay of sunlight, shadow, and moisture on the plants, the way children's laughter vibrated through the village and influenced the energy of the soil, the careful steps of elders tending their gardens and livestock. Every detail mattered, every gesture contributed to the collective harmony. By afternoon, the subtle changes became visible. Colors brightened in leaves and blooms, small animals moved freely with renewed confidence, and the villagers themselves seemed lighter, their movements more fluid, their expressions softer. The healer then paused near the largest oak at the village center, its branches spreading wide like a protective canopy. He knelt, placing hands on the trunk, feeling the ancient pulse that connected tree, soil, water, and human life. Here, he reflected on the lessons of the hidden grove, the distant illness that had tested his understanding, and the personal memories that had guided his insight. He realized that all knowledge, ancient manuscripts, observations of nature, the subtle guidance of memory, was only valuable when woven into the fabric of everyday life, shared and applied in harmony with the rhythms of community and the natural world. As evening approached, a calm settled over Hollow Vale. The sun sank behind the hills, casting the village in a warm, amber glow. Lanterns flickered to life in cottages, and the river mirrored the soft light, rippling gently with the evening breeze. The healer walked slowly through the streets, observing families gathered in small clusters, children playing quietly, elders speaking in measured tones, and the general hum of life flowing smoothly once more. Each face carried a trace of serenity, an acknowledgement of the quiet restoration that had taken place. Returning to his cottage, he set down his bundles and instruments, taking a moment to look out over the vale. The hills, the river, the trees, and the village all seemed to breathe together, a symphony of quiet life, balanced and harmonious. He sat before the hearth, pendant warm, notebook open with sketches and observations from his journey, reflecting on the depth of understanding he had gained. Healing, he realized, was not a matter of curing one ailment or mastering one herb. It was the patient, careful weaving of attention, empathy, memory, and natural rhythm into the world around him. Night fell, carrying with it a profound quiet. The lanterns glowed softly, and the distant rustle of trees and the gentle flow of the river created a lullaby for the valley. The healer lay down, allowing himself to drift into sleep. Visions of the hidden grove, silver-tinted leaves, luminous blossoms, and the interconnected rhythms of Hollow Vale flowing through his mind. In his dreams, the village moved as one living organism. Each heartbeat, each breath, each gesture harmonized with the pulse of the earth. A sense of peace, of completion, and of enduring wisdom settled over him, leaving the valley, the people, and the healer himself in a state of gentle, timeless equilibrium. And as the stars shimmered above Hollow Vale, the healer slept cradled by the pulse of the land. He had come to understand the knowledge of the past, guiding the present, and the quiet promise that harmony, patience, and care would endure through the generations long after this night had passed.